right? But before I really get started, right, before I actually got heavily involved with FCA, I had some real conversations with God, right? Like I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life before I got into this public speaking thing. And so before I got started, I kind of asked God, I said, what do you want me to do? Like, what's my next move? And so I said, you know what, I'm going to join this international speech competition. I said, if this is where I'm supposed to be, God, like, show me this is where I'm supposed to be. And so I went to that first level of competition. I won that first level. I went to the second level. I won that one also. Third and fourth, same thing. And I got all the way to the regional quarterfinals, and that's where I lost, right? But I didn't have any public speaking skills. Like I had never done this professionally. I had never done it I had done it in maybe high school, right? But I had never done it at the level that I'm doing it now. So for me to get that far with no practice, no prior experience, that was a blessing, right? So I said, okay, this is where I'm supposed to be. And so I'm thinking about, okay, so I'm getting booked for gigs, right? I'm reaching out to schools and they're hiring me, they're bringing me on. But I wasn't making the impact that I really wanted to make, nor was I making the financial impact that I wanted to make. And so I was kind of thinking like, okay, so where can I move? What's my next level? And then it hit me, I was like, boom, FCA, right? Like I was an athlete before, I did FCA when I was in high school, right? Like that's the next move for me. So then I started doing my research, right? And I saw a massive amount of opportunity, right? There was like FCA at every university, right? And I was like, oh God, you blessing me. Now I'm finna get paid and speak? Yo, this is it. So as I'm doing my research, I come across Joe. And what does Joe do? Joe calls me in for a meeting. He says, you know what, brother, you have an amazing story. I would love to meet with you. So I said, you know what? Cool, let's do it. So he calls me into the office, right? And he's telling me about FCA. He's telling me the hierarchy about how things work, how I can, move up into FCA and all these things. And I was like, things are sounding really good. I'm like, this is great. And then he hits me with some news that I wasn't quite prepared for. He said, this conversation has been good, Anthony. I just want to let you know that I would never ask you this. He said, the next question I'm going to ask you, I would never ask you to do something like this. He said, but before this meeting even took place, I prayed. And I prayed that somebody was going to come and have the same level of motivation, be ready to make the same kind of impact that I'm making. He said, and here you are. I'm thinking, yes, I am. Yes, I am. Right? And then he says, once again, I would never ask you this, but God told me to ask you and present you with this offer. So in my mind, when I'm hearing offer, I'm like, you finna pay me. And then he hit me with, I want you to work with me pro bono. How much does that pay? It was for free. But he hit me with the God thing first. So how do I, how do I say no to that, right? Like he said, God told me to ask you, so he's asking you. So when I told him, we sat there, we paused for a quick little second, and I was like, I'll never forget it. I was like, well, can you get him back on the phone? Because me and God had a different conversation than the one you having right now. But here I am, doing it for free, right? But I wanted to come in here and talk to you about the vision, because sometimes the vision that you have is blocking you from the vision, from the blessing that God has. Because I didn't understand what FCA was going to do for me on the other side of it, right? Because I've been able to do different things through FCA, and I've been able to reach other schools and other athletes because of FCA that I never would have thought of, right? But when I think about everything that's kind of going on with me in this time, is that I think about the story of Job. How many of y'all familiar with the story of Job? Anybody? Okay. So the book of Job, what happens is I've always thought that God and the devil had an agreement sometimes, right? Like how does like bad things happen to good people, right? Like I'm sure we've all asked that question, right? I'm sure we've all said, why me in some situation, right? Like, why is this happening to me, right? So in the book of Job, what happens is the God and devil have an agreement. God says, have you seen or have you considered my righteous brother Job, right? And so the devil says the only reason why Job is so righteous and why he follows you so much is because you blessed him with so much prosperity, right? But if you make him suffer, right, he won't be the same righteous person who follows you, right? So God says, try him. Let's see what happens. So the devil goes in and he takes away his health. Job has boils put all over his body. The devil takes away his family. He loses his kids. And then he takes away his wealth, which is his livestock. Takes it all away. Now, Job has 3 friends that come into the story. Now, how many of y'all got 3 friends? Or a black boy. Right? Right? Like, they came into the story, though. They come into the picture and they say that you must have done something wrong. Like, you must have done something for this to happen to you, right? Because God wouldn't just do this to you. You must have done something. How many of y'all got friends in here that said, what you do? Look, I've been there. I know what happened, right? What happens is they come to him and they're saying, you must have done something. That's the only reason why God would punish you, is because you did something. Now, Job, on the other hand, Job is like, I didn't do anything wrong. I'm innocent. Like, the suffering that I'm enduring right now has no means. There's no justification for it, right? So what happens is later on in the story, Job is going through like this emotional roller coaster, right? Where I don't want to say he's cussing God, but he's really angry at some of the things. He's saying that God destroys all good people. Like, there is no justice in God's world, because if he's punishing me, somebody who's innocent, he must do this to everybody. Later on in the story, another man comes along and he says, God doesn't punish everybody. What God does is he puts people through certain things to maybe build character. Maybe God puts suffering on people so they can learn a lesson. Right? And so when I think about just that part alone, right, about the things that God puts you through to build character, I think about 2020 and some things that happened to me in my life, right? So February 29th, on a leap year, 2020, I was driving home with a friend. We had went out to a club down in Central, right? And I accepted a drink from somebody. That's the last thing I remember. But on March 1st, when I woke up, what doctors told me was that I was in a major rollover car accident. I was ejected from the vehicle, and that I had broken my neck, my back, my face, my ribs, skull, shoulder, and I had severely damaged lungs. And they looked down at me and they said, you may never walk again. So you can imagine the emotional roller coaster that hit me, because I couldn't even talk at the time. I had tubes going down my throat. My hands and my legs were strapped down to the bed. My mom was looking over me. She asked me if I was okay, but the only way I could say anything to my mom was if I moved my eyes from left to right. Like, that was my only form of communication. So later on in that evening, they took me up to the recovery floor. And that night I'm crying. I have tears running down my face. I didn't cry in front of anybody. I cried when nobody could see me, right? Because one thing that I know is that I don't like for other people to feel bad for me. I'd rather feel bad by myself, right? Like, I don't want the sympathy, right? I can be strong and I'll cry when nobody else is looking, right? Like, that's just me. But what happened is that night while I'm crying, all I'm hearing is, it doesn't define you. It doesn't define you. And so I said, God, if you're the miracle worker that you say you are, help. Help. The very next day, the nurse came into the room and she said, good morning. I said, good morning. And I said, I want to try to walk. And she looked at me and she looked at my mom that was sitting over against the wall, and they must have made some kind of eye contact, because my mom was looking back at me and she was like telling me not to. But the nurse looked back at me and I said, no, I want to try to walk today. And so they came over to the side of the bed and she called somebody else in there and they helped sit me up. And that day I was able to walk 10 steps. The next day I was able to walk around the hospital floor one time. The third day I was able to walk around the hospital floor twice and I was released from the hospital on the 5th day. Now what's miraculous about that story is not only was I released from the hospital on the 5th day, not only was I walking on the 3rd day, all of this happened within 1 week of my son's 1st birthday. So thinking on that moment, right, like all of these events were happening to me. Almost died before my son turned 1. Even before that, I had lost my job. I was trying to figure out how I was going to take care of my family. I was going through a divorce at the time. Like I was going through a lot of different things, even leading up into that accident where you would say, how are you even still functioning? But to know that I almost left my son and my daughter. I could live without money, right? But to know that I almost left them with nothing, that does something to me. And so when you actually have a belief in God and passing on your troubles and your struggles to Him, you can never lose. And so like in the story of Job, as he's going through all of these trials and tribulations, right, where he's taking the wealth is taken away, the family is taken away, the health is taken away, and he's frustrated. He goes and he's talking to God and he tells God to show himself. Tell me why you're doing this to me. And God shows up. And many times when we're going through our struggles and our situations, we make things very simple, right? Like we make things very simple to where it's like, why are you doing this to me? But what God said was, you've never had to deal with the universe. Were you here when I made the constellations, right? Were you here when I decided when the sun set and when the sun rose? Said that opposite, right? But were you here when I did that? Were you here to show how the deer eats and when the lion feeds? Like you weren't here for all of that, but you're going to tell me how I should run and how I should make things just in the world, right? But basically what he was saying is that the only thing I need for you to do, the only thing you have to worry about doing is trusting in me. So when you're going through your struggles in life, right? When you're going through those challenges, when things really don't seem like they're going to go your way, all you have to do is put your trust in God and allow Him to work for you on your behalf. Many times we want to take things into our own control instead of passing on and deferring to the one who can solve everything. The problem is we don't even let Him sometimes. How many times have you gone through something and you went straight to God? Why not? And here's the thing, I'm human like y'all. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I go through a struggle and the first thing I say is God. No, not every time. Just like you guys are in your sport and you're practicing your craft on a daily basis, right? And you are trying to be the best version that you can be on the field. You're trying to be the best version of yourself off the field. Practice that same energy with God. And it becomes very simple. I'm not talking about spending an hour a day. Start small. I can't think of a single person that's lost 30 pounds in a day or a month. And if you do it healthy, you're not supposed to lose that much anyway in a year. So clearly, if that's what it takes for you to be strong or for you to lose weight or for you to become fit and be the best athlete you can be, clearly it's going to take practice and it's going to take time. But the one thing that God said about Job was that it was okay for him to be upset. It was okay for him to question. But the one thing that he did was that he went directly to God. And he struggled through prayer. He didn't struggle with his friends and trying to figure out how he should get things done. He went to God and he went through that struggle with him. So that's all I want you guys to do. That's my call to action for y'all. My challenge for y'all is, when you go through challenges, when you go through the struggles, when you have the obstacles that face yourselves or that face y'all, don't be afraid to concede. Don't be afraid to defer. Some of y'all listen to y'all coaches more than you do God. Y'all trust a coach to get y'all to a winning season, but you don't go to God and trust him to give you the winning season. When y'all don't have the best record, when y'all don't have the best season, what do? You go back and you try to figure out, okay, what can I do next year, right? Like, how can I get better next year? But do you think that it's actually a lesson in your bad season? Do you think that there's a lesson in your injuries? Do you think there's a lesson in the good season? Because that's when it's really hard. It's really hard to find those lessons when things are going great. But you always tweak something. There's always something you can do better. So even in your good season, you just have to be disciplined enough in yourself with God to say, what are my blind spots? Because I'm seeing the prize right now and everything looks good, but what can I not see out here that you see? Bring those things to light. Humble me to those things that I can't see. If you do that, and you put your trust, your love, your loyalty, your commitment, your discipline, if you put all of that in God, I guarantee you, you will have whatever it is that you want. But you have to let go first and let God. That's my time.